Griswold. I'm the Ward 2 council member. And I don't know how many of y'all voted for me or whatever, but I appreciate whoever did. And those of you that didn't, I'm happy to represent you just as well. We haven't had many ward meetings, over the past few years. Sherry and I, my wife Sherry's in the back, we've been here since about 2008 now. And we renovated a home on North College, and we're real happy to be there. And I just welcome the opportunity to work for y'all. I'm retired, so right now my sole job, so to speak, is working for y'all. So please be in touch with me anytime you have issues or concerns. There's some handouts up here, has my contact information on it. So I communicate with y'all primarily through my Facebook page. There's a Auburn Ward 2 Facebook page, and also I use the Nextdoor app. And those two things seem to be able to get the word out quite a bit. I did talk to a homeowner association president tonight, though, about an hour ago, and he was unaware of the meeting. So there's got to be some improvement I can make on how to get the word out to y'all. It's in the letter that comes along with your water bill. It's online. I don't know how many of y'all are looking at the city websites and whatnot, but we're pleased that the city council meetings are now being live streamed on Facebook, the city webpage, and on YouTube. So you can find us and watch us if you don't have a chance to come see us on a Tuesday night. Please join us by way of the live streaming. And we're very fortunate tonight are my cohort in crime over here, Bob Collins from Ward 6. And Bob is at the forefront of trying to get our meetings live streamed. And so he and some others have succeeded in doing that for the city. And then the other meetings that are live streamed are the Planning Commission meetings, which are going on Thursday evening. And the Planning Commission meetings are not live streamed, but they're available for you to look at the next day. So the difference is the city council meetings are live streamed with closed captions as they occur. And the Planning Commission meetings are streamed the next day also with closed captions. So please take advantage of that. And Bob is nice enough to come this evening and video this meeting. So if you have friends and neighbors that couldn't make it this evening, please tell them the same thing. It's available on my Facebook page. It'll be on there tomorrow, so you can share the comments or whatever. The other thing I have up here is a handout. Please pick it up on your way out. It's all the upcoming board vacancies. So I would love to have any and all of y'all apply for various board positions, boards and commissions within the city. It has the vacancy dates and the terms and that kind of information on the second handout. One thing I didn't mention, this other handout with my contact info has contact information for various city departments as well. And I am very happy to take your inquiries and forward them on to the city. But the way our city management structure is, I can't call, say, a division head, for example, and ask him or tell him to do something. They all work for the city manager. City manager works for the council. But because of all the PR or HR rules, Bob or I, we can't call a department head and ask him to check into something. So you send something to me, I send it to Jim Buston, Jim turns around and sends it to the manager, or to the department head. One way or another, we're going to get an answer. But if you have something in a hurry, I encourage you to call directly to one of these department heads. They can get to it faster than I can, although I do like to know about what your concerns are so I can address that as well. Okay. Of the list of things that I get phone calls and emails about, runoff and stormwater management is right up there on top of the list, along with traffic. We all know traffic is a problem throughout Auburn. But for the stormwater management, I invited this evening to have Matthew Dunn. Matthew is the Assistant Director of Water Resource Management. Tell me if I get this right. Okay, and the Watershed Division is under Matt, and they are concerned primarily with stormwater runoff, water quality, and construction site runoff. And that's the biggest thing I really have calls about, is we have an awful lot of construction going on in Ward 2, and we've had an awful lot of rain. So no matter where you look, you're going to see red water, red mud running from these various sites, sometimes getting on the roads. And those are things that I get calls about, and so I turn around and do call the city And they send out the inspectors, and sometimes people are cited, sometimes they have to come in with a grader of some sort and get the mud up off the roads or whatever. But Matt is going to give us his view of it, and I encourage you all to ask questions. And if we don't have the answers this evening, we will get them to you. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt, who is a professional engineer, and we're pleased to have you here with us this evening.
All right,
thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I'm going to try to stand here, hopefully where this works without having to stand up here. So be a little closer to you. If you start throwing stuff at me, I may. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity that Councilman Griswold extended to us tonight to be able to come and talk to you guys about our stormwater program and specifically erosion and sediment control. Like Councilman Griswold said, that is one of the primary calls that we get in our department. Concerns that we get, complaints that we get are regarding erosion and sediment control issues. And so my intent tonight is kind of go through our program, explain to you what we do, some of the issues that we see, some of the challenges that we see with development, and be here to answer any questions you have as well. I do want to acknowledge a few people in the back. Eric Carson, our director, is here, Water Resource Management. Ron McCurry, our stormwater coordinator. Ron's one of the ones out doing most of the inspections, erosion control inspections, and he was kind enough to be here tonight. And then John Hoare with our inspection services department is here as well. So I've been with the city about 15 years now. This May will be 15 years, and have been involved in stormwater management in one role or another during the entire time that I've been here. And so just to give you kind of an outline of what I want to cover tonight, in order to get to our erosion sediment control program, which is where I'm going to spend most of the presentation, but in order to get to there, I want to kind of give you a context of our department and how we kind of got to arrived at where we are right now. So I'm going to give you just kind of a real brief overview of our Department of Water Resource Management, and I'm going to give you a brief history of our and timeline of our stormwater program, and really going to highlight in that some of the more important things related to erosion sediment control. And then I'm going to give you a real brief overview of our watershed division, the group that's charged with managing our stormwater program and erosion sediment control issues. And then I want to talk a little bit about our water resources in general. That's something I always like to cover because a lot of people don't realize the amount of water resources that we have here in town and really why we do the things that we do. And then lastly, the majority of the presentation will be talking about erosion sediment control. Water resource management, we have three principal divisions. That's water treatment and distribution, wastewater collection and treatment, and watershed management. We have 60 full-time employees, and our mission statement that you would find on our website there is to manage the water quality of Auburn's water resources and provide excellent water and sewer services to residents and to all residents and businesses in the city of Auburn. That's what we strive as a department to do each and every day. And so that's the building there you see kind of on the background of the slides. That's hopefully looks familiar to most of you. That's the Water Resource Management Complex on West Sanford Avenue. That's where we're located. All right, so to cover our stormwater program, I'm going to go back to really the infancy of our program, where it started, and to kind of where we are right now. I really want to highlight some specific things related to erosion sediment control. But in 2003, the city applied for and received what's called a National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Phase 2 Stormwater Permit. Now this was a federally mandated permit that came down from EPA back in the late 90s, around 1999 or so. EPA really had a strong focus of looking at stormwater management. Until that time, most of their focus as it relates to the Clean Water Act had been on point source dischargers, basically what I call the end of pipe folks, so the wastewater treatment plants, the industrial dischargers, things of that nature. But they really started to see back in the late 90s that stormwater management and figuring out ways to control that was something that more focus, more attention needed to be paid toward. And so they developed the stormwater regulations, and coming out of that, it required municipalities to apply for and develop a stormwater management program. And so Phase 1 versus Phase 2, I throw that around. Auburn is a Phase 2 community. It all has to do with the size of your community. Phase 1 communities are your larger cities. In Alabama, those are going to be your Birmingham, Jefferson County, Mobile, Huntsville. Your Phase 2 communities are kind of a tier below that. So we are a Phase 2 stormwater permitted city, and that permit has been in place since 2003. Now, when it was initially, when our program was developed, stormwater was initially managed through our Public Works Department, which is now Engineering Services. But as it relates to erosion and sediment control, as part of our program, one of the first things that we did was develop a erosion and sediment control ordinance. That ordinance was approved by City Council back in 2003, and I believe was probably one of the first of its kind in the state of Alabama. And that ordinance really kind of set the groundwork of our program even today, and as far as our inspection program, our plan reviews, things of that nature. And so that ordinance has been in place since 2003. In 2005, management of our stormwater program moved or transitioned from our Public Works Department over to what at that time was the city's Water and Sewer Department. We created a new division known as our Watershed Division, and that group was charged with basically overseeing and managing our Phase 2 stormwater program, including our erosion and sediment control program. Also in 2005, Council approved revisions to our ordinance. Like everything that goes along, as you implement something, you put it in place, you find areas that you can do things better. And one of the things we initially noted with our ordinance is that we had a good ordinance in place, but we didn't really have any enforcement mechanisms in it. We could go out and ask for things to be done, but we really had no enforcement to make a developer or an owner of a piece of property do the things we were asking them to do. So in 2005, Council approved revisions to that ordinance that established protocol for enforcement and basically gave city staff the ability to issue citations for erosion and sediment control issues, primarily on the things like stop work orders and or fines. And I'll get into that and talk a little bit about that and how that works with our program. A couple other things just real quickly. 2011, we migrated from a paper-based inspection program that was somewhat inefficient. We did all our inspections on paper, wrote all our letters, mailed all those out. All that went to an electronic-based inspection program in 2011. That was an in-house software created with collaboration between our department and the city's IT department. That migrated over to a standard software, commercial software the city's using called CityWorks back in 2015, and that's a GIS-centric asset management software is what it labels itself as. But all our inspections are done through the CityWorks software now. When Ron goes out to a job site, his inspection forms, everything he needs is on a tablet or a computer that he uses in the field. He can generate his inspection reports, generate his letters. It's all done electronically. It's all housed in that software, so we have records of everything we've done. 2016, our current permit was issued. One of the things I should have said earlier is that our stormwater permit has to be renewed every 5 years. And so our current permit was applied for and received back in 2016. And then lastly, in 2017, one of the latest developments with our program is that we work with, I've still got codes up there, John, I'm learning. So inspection services to basically establish some procedures for what we call lot level erosion and sediment control. And that's basically after a development is kind of built out, the roads and the infrastructure is in place, and they're getting ready to build homes or whatever they're doing. At that point, John and his staff get involved, and we developed some procedures that gave them some inspection and enforcement procedures. So, as it relates to our watershed division, we have 3 employees in that division, a division manager, our stormwater coordinator, and our watershed coordinator. That division is responsible for oversight and management of our program. And as part of that, the EPA requires that we address what they call 5 minimum control measures. And that's really the basis for our whole program, those things that you see there. Public education and outreach and public involvement. Examples of that would be things like the presentation I'm giving tonight, our storm drain marking program, stream cleanups, the water festival, Earth Day activities, things that we're doing to educate the public on the importance of stormwater management. Illicit discharge detection and elimination, that's basically going out and trying to identify anything that's discharging to our storm sewer that's not stormwater. That can be anything from a cross connection where maybe an old sanitary sewer line got tied into a storm drain, or it could be a contractor out dumping a paint can in a storm drain, things of that nature. Grass clippings piled up on a storm inlet, those types of things. Construction site stormwater runoff, that's what we're talking about tonight. Post-construction stormwater management, basically looking at water quality after development's done and how that development impacts stormwater and our water resources. Pollution prevention and good housekeeping, that's the things the city does internally to promote stormwater management. Examples of that would be anything from our street sweeping program that our Public Works Department has implemented to municipal recycling program, all kind of internal or in-house programs that we do here at the city to promote good stormwater management. Water quality monitoring is another responsibility that we have. We have a very comprehensive water quality monitoring program, and I'll touch on that a little bit in a second. And one of the things that we're extremely proud of is that our program, our stormwater program, is certainly the poster child for stormwater management in Alabama, and I would venture to say in the entire United States. And I think most people would tell you that. In 2018, extremely proud the city received a national award from the Water Environment Federation, which is one of the premier international water organizations in the country. And we received a very prestigious National Municipal Stormwater and Green Infrastructure Award for program management. We were one of only 2 community award winners in the United States to get that award. So that's something we're extremely proud of, and we really feel like our program is extremely innovative, and that, like I said, a lot of times we get called by the ADEM about things we're doing, ways to help other communities that are developing their program and implementing their program. Just a few facts about the division. Every year we perform over 1,000 erosion sediment control inspections, over 250 inspections of storm sewer outfalls, 10,000 water quality analyses. We manage a public water quality viewer application. That's something I encourage each of you in here to get on and check out. If you go to the Water Resource Management website, we have a public water quality viewer where you can look at any of our water quality data that we have available. It's there for your viewing on the website. That was the first of its kind in Alabama, and one of the very first in the United States, first communities to have that. We operate and maintain 5 real-time stream gauging stations that provide real-time data regarding stream flow. We perform all the monitoring, water quality monitoring associated with the Water Board Source Water Monitoring Program. And we conduct numerous presentations, as I said earlier, education and outreach, a big part of our stormwater program. We do a lot of that, a lot of education and outreach initiatives that we're involved in. So why do we do what we do? Why is stormwater management important? And I've got just a few slides here that we've used in other presentations that I thought were relevant, but Alabama is a very water-rich state. This slide here, if you go from left to right, you see the major river basins on the left all the way down to the what I call the major watersheds, and then kind of the sub-watersheds, which are hard to see there on that very far right picture there. But the block right there in the center are kind of the east central part of the state there. That's Auburn. As far as major river basins, we're in the Alabama River Basin. More specifically, once you dial that into looking at watersheds, we sit in the Tallapoosa River Basin. And actually, we sit at the very bottom of the Tallapoosa River watershed. That Tallapoosa Basin there, that would be it right there. It starts. But the Tallapoosa Basin is where we sit in Alabama. Alabama is a very water-rich state. I was reading earlier just some facts preparing for this. Over 10% of the freshwater resources in the entire United States flow through or originate in Alabama. I thought that was pretty interesting. And also Alabama is #1 in the country in terms of freshwater fish biodiversity. There's over 330 species of freshwater fish in Alabama, which puts us #1. I thought that was an interesting fact. I think Tennessee is number 2 with about 320 or so. Dialing a little further down, looking at Lee County, the eastern portion of Lee County is divided almost in half. The eastern portion of the county, once you get over into the eastern edges of Opelika, that portion of the county drains into the Chattahoochee River Basin. The western portion of the county, of which Auburn is entirely part of, is the Tallapoosa River Basin, and that's what you see there. The orange on the left kind of denotes the portion of the county that's in the Tallapoosa Basin. As far as our program, we have a population of 60,000 or a little over that now. Our coverage area of what we're responsible for managing with our stormwater permit is about 60 square miles. We have over 100 miles of storm sewer pipe and about 450 miles of receiving stream. Looking at our local watersheds, our largest watershed is primarily going to be the Saugahatchee Creek watershed, and that's the watershed you see here on the northern part of town. And I believe all, if not the majority of Ward 2 would be in the Saugahatchee watershed. For the most part, the rail in there where as a dividing line between Saugahatchee Creek, what flows north versus what flows south. But Saugahatchee Creek's about 217 square miles from where it originates to where it dumps into Yates Lake down near Tallahassee. Choctaw Creek, you see here on the western parts of town. Once you get over onto Highway 14, Outwire Road, some of those areas, you get into the Choctaw Basin. Parkerson Mill, that's the watershed that flows primarily through campus. A lot of the downtown development we're seeing right now, a lot of that development is located in the Parkerson Mill Creek watershed. A lot of downtown, Tumors Corner, that area, all drains into Parkerson Mill Creek. Just to the east of that is Town Creek. In this general area of downtown, Morse Mill Creek, kind of over to the southeastern parts of the city, and then the Chihuahua Creek watershed. So that just kind of gives you a context of watersheds in Auburn. We do have our share of impairments, like most communities. The ones you see there in red, Saugahatchee Creek, Morse Mill Creek, and Parkerson Mill Creek, all have some source of impairment per ADEM and EPA, and there's various phases of those, and I could get into a lot of technical stuff and go into detail on some of that, but for sake of kind of moving into the erosion sediment control part of the program, I'll skip over some of that. But the main thing to note is a lot of the reason we do what we do is to hopefully address those impacts and to hopefully improve water quality in our water resources, and we feel like we have data that indicates we are making progress in those areas, and so that's what you see there. All right, so all of that kind of set the context of what Councilman Griswold asked us to talk about tonight, and what I'm assuming you guys may have some questions or concerns. Yes, Ms. Newton?
Go back to the previous slide.
Yes, ma'am.
The impairment under
Yes, ma'am.
Saugahatchee, DO, and OE, I'm assuming DO is dissolved oxygen.
Organic enrichment. So that's primarily phosphorus. When they issued what's called the TMDL, or the total maximum daily load, essentially what the state and the EPA do, once a water body gets put on the impaired water body list, which means it's not meeting its intended use classification. That could be fish and wildlife, swimming and recreation, whatever it may be. If that water body is not meeting its intended use criteria, the state will put it on what's called 303D list for impaired water bodies. After being on that impaired water body list, the intent is eventually they will issue what's called a total maximum daily load. And the intent of that total maximum daily load is to establish criteria to hopefully improve that water body and its use classification. So Saugahatchee, the TMDL was approved back in 2008, and it was primarily nutrients, total phosphorus. And a lot of that was historic impairment from the old West Point Pepperell plant upstream, which was a very significant phosphorus discharger to the stream that has since pulled out of the stream. But a lot of that was the reason for that impairment on Saugahatchee. Going into our erosion sediment control program, and I want to kind of walk through the whole process of where we start and get all the way through, from plan review all the way down to inspection and enforcement. But we initially get involved on the very front end of a project. When a developer and an engineer submit plans for a proposed development, one of the plans they're required to submit with their engineering documents is an erosion and sediment control plan for that development. That plan typically gets submitted through the city's development review team process. That plan comes to our department for our review, and we review that plan to ensure that it's in compliance with our standards that we have in place. One of the things I would note here is that the city had adopted statewide standards. This goes back as far as 2003 here. That the Alabama Handbook for Erosion Control, and I'm going to call it the Alabama Handbook for sake of saying the long name there, but the Alabama Handbook is really kind of the Bible, if you will, for erosion and sediment control standards in Alabama, and that's what we use as our standards here in Auburn. But the intent of that was to encourage uniformity in design, maintenance, construction, those types of things. But when we review an erosion sediment control plan, if we have comments on that plan, those comments are compiled, they're sent back to an engineer to address prior to that plan being approved. And in general, we typically, most all the time, have at least a few comments that have to be addressed on a plan. But once that plan is approved, once the rest of the engineering plans for the development have been approved, and they've all been signed off on by all the departments that are involved in the DRT process, the Engineering Services Department schedules a pre-construction meeting. Now that pre-construction meeting, the owner of the property is given an erosion and sediment control permit. And that permit allows him to do only the clearing that is necessary to get his BMPs in place per his approved plan. It does not allow mass clearing of a site, mass grading of a site, even though we've had them come out and tell you, hey, we need to clear this 100 acres to put our silt fence in. No, not usually going to be the case. So that permit is just for them to get their erosion sediment control measures in. So that is the very first step when they come out to break ground on a development that they should be doing, is installing their erosion sediment control on a job site. Once they've got those measures in place, they will call us to come out. Ron goes out generally and does an initial, what we call walkthrough, on-site walkthrough inspection. And it's either a pass-fail. You know, if we go out and they've implemented all their items per their plan, that site is passed. If they don't have all their issues in, then they fail. We tell them what their issues are, and we come back out again after they have addressed those items. But once we have approved, and are satisfactory with their initial inspection, they are given what's called a grading and utility permit. Only once they have that grading and utility permit can they begin mass grading operations on the job site, installation of their infrastructure, their roads, their storm sewer pipe, their sewer, their water lines, whatever it may be. They cannot do that until they get that grading and utility permit. Once all of that's gone through, once we've done that initial walkthrough inspection and signed off on that, then a project falls into our inspection, routine inspection site list. And then our requirements are that we do an inspection on every development, a minimum of once per month, or after every 3/4 inch 24-hour rainfall event. So anytime we get more than 3/4 of an inch in 24 hours, our guys are out doing inspection on a development site, which means we've been very busy as of late. All right, so inspection and enforcement. Generally, when we go out and do an inspection, they fall into 3 categories. That's either no deficiencies. That's very rare that we go out and we find no deficiencies on a job site. But if we go out and there are no deficiencies, we basically just send a copy of the inspection report and a letter to the owner of the property, telling them we did an inspection on whatever date it is and that no deficiencies were found. If we go out and we find what we deem to be minor deficiencies, and examples of that are going to primarily be minor, what I call maintenance items. If they've got silt fence that needs to be cleaned out, they've got a construction exit pad that may need to be refreshed or turned over. They've got minor items, but they really haven't had a sediment release from a job site. If we're in that category, we're going to consider those to be minor deficiencies. We're going to send the owner of the property an inspection report, and they get a letter that tells them, here are the deficiencies we found, and you have to correct those before the next rain event. And then last major deficiencies. And we see, this is where we get into some of these heavy rainfall events that we've been receiving as of late. A lot of times we get into this category, well, I would say a lot of times, but particularly after rain events, some of these heavy rain events, we'll go out to a job and we deem to be major deficiencies. And that can be anything from failure to correct minor deficiencies that we noted in your previous inspection. If we go out and you had issues that you haven't corrected, maybe they were minor, but we come back out now and you still haven't addressed those could result in an NOV. Sediment release, if there's visible sediment release from the site, that's going to be considered a major deficiency, or if they're just significant BMP failures. And I'm going to talk about some of these heavy rains that we received, but I can tell you after, and I'll give an example of the rain event we received December 28th, right after Christmas, that Thursday night into that Friday morning. We had about 6 inches of rain, and almost every site that we had major issues after those kind of rain events. It's just the nature of construction. You're going to have those kind of issues. But we had a lot of sites at that time that were in this last category of major deficiencies. But if we get to this point, our ordinance basically says that we issue a notice of violation to the owner of the property, and that has to be sent via certified mail. That's coming from a city attorney that has instructed us that's the way it has to be done. But that NOV is sent to the owner via certified mail. Once they receive that, they have 72 hours to correct those issues or make what we deem to be satisfactory progress toward addressing the issues. A lot of times what we find, particularly the way it's been the last couple of months, contractors can get out and they can do some work, but there may be some stuff they just can't get to. Just site conditions are such that it is so wet that maybe they can't go and clean out a sediment basin or demuck a sediment basin. So we try to use we try to be reasonable regarding some of those things as long as they're making satisfactory progress. At the end of that time, we conduct a follow-up inspection. If they continue to fail to address those items at the end of that 72 hours, they get a verbal warning from us that says you have 24 hours now to correct this. If they have not corrected it at the end of that 24 hours, they get a stop work order and or a fine from us. We have found, and I'll be honest with you, the stop work orders are much more effective than a fine, and that's primarily, but our fines are $500 per day per offense, which for a lot of these developers is a very small amount. But when we go out and we shut down their entire job site, that gets their attention in a hurry. And so we generally take that route. We generally go stop work order. We really have not, probably since the program actually started, we had a few that we went that route in the beginning, but we've just found over time that stop work orders are more effective at getting to the end of the point that we're looking for, which is that the issues are addressed and corrected. So most of our enforcement, if it gets to that point, is going to be in the form of a stop work order. And when we issue a stop work order, that means all work on site has to cease until their deficiencies are corrected. No more work is allowed until they address those items. I'm not going to go through this. This is just a chart on our website that you can go to that outlines basically the things I just went through on the last 2 slides. But if you're interested, you can go through this. If you like charts and flow charts and nice things like that, this is a chart that just outlines the procedures and process at this one. In terms of what we call lot level inspections, and this is a relatively new development in our program. Said for years our program had primarily been focused on development. Once it got into the actual building construction and homes were being built, we didn't really have a formal program in place. And so back in 2017, we worked with John Hoare and his staff to develop a program to establish inspection and enforcement procedures for lot level erosion and sediment control. Once the homes are being built, once the commercial development is being built, and John and his staff get involved on doing codes inspections, this is how we deal with erosion and sediment control. Very similar, we have minor deficiencies, major deficiencies. Codes inspector, if he goes out and notices issues when he's doing his inspection, if they're minor deficiencies, he will ask the building contractor, he'll complete his inspection he's doing at that time. but he will withhold any further inspection until those issues are addressed. John, correct me if I got any of this wrong, but I think I'm right on that. And then major deficiencies, if we go out and our inspector finds major deficiencies, basically the only difference here is that he's not going to continue with the inspection he's doing at that time. He's going to leave the job, tell the builder that he's immediately has to fix the issues, and code will withhold any further inspections until those issues are addressed. Yes, ma'am.
But they can still be working on, the things they've already been given permits for can continue to be worked on. So there's still work going on individual properties, they just won't get their next permit for the next part of it.
Answer that one, John. So.
What happened is, I took over the house, and they actually have 30 inspections, because that's where you're on your foundation. And one of the things we do is before we give you the permit, you have a pre-erosion inspection. The pre to start off with the right foot, that helps. So until they pass that, they don't get a permit. And we go out with electrical rough in, and a minor might be a guy knocks over the silt gets over some gravel on the road. We will do that inspection, and not the next one if they fix it. Contractors live and die by inspections. They may call the electrical rough in today, and they want the plumbing tomorrow, but we won't do it. And it's amazing, we found out, we could have issued all these citations, but it takes months work to work through the courts. You hold your inspections, and it happens. Twin City the other day in the morning, they had an inspector around in the morning, did a couple of inspections, came back to lunchtime, did some more. They had tracked and mowed it off like a road so much, we shut them down. Within 30 minutes, tree sweepers came from somewhere, and they cleaned it up. So the contractors live and die by inspections. And we also put, you have things immediately that you can't wait 2 weeks for your next inspection. We'll follow up the next day on it. So even though we have the initial, almost every inspection we do on site is an open inspection as well.
I have a lot of evidence in the country.
There are also, there's 5 inspectors.
On individual lots.
There's 5 inspectors. We did 24,000 inspections last year. There are going to be times that things slip through, and I will not that would just be not even feasible to do that, but things happen. When we do get some of these large rain events, we get so overwhelmed, where we had a landscaper that ran all the silt fences over during the rain and pushed the dirt to the street because he wanted to finish. So before we started this program with us, we were honestly receiving about 20 complaints a month about soil erosion. We now, except for December, we will probably receiving 1 a month. So that's a drastic percentage. Do we still have room to work on it? Yes. But it has truly helped the amount. And we know it helps because contractors are complaining about it. So we know we touched on something that is moving us forward to control it. Yes.
All right, just a few statistics from last year. Right now, we're inspecting about 40 development sites. As we all know, there's a lot of development going on in Auburn right now. We have, I think, Ron, it's right at 40. And the issue with that is the development sites we're inspecting, more times than not, they're very large developments. When we go out to do an erosion and sediment control inspection, for Ron to do the detailed inspections that he does, a lot of times it may take 2, 3, 4 hours for him to inspect one job site. So, you know, there's a lot of work. Ron's out on basically a daily basis doing inspections on development sites. Last year, we conducted about 600 development site inspections. Now that only includes what we're deeming the minimum of once per month or the rainfall inspection. It does not include the follow-up inspections. We're trying to migrate all of that over into city work, so we don't have a true number on actually how many times we may actually go back out to a development. That's why that term that I put in earlier that showed about 1,000, we feel very comfortable that's well over 1,000 times that we actually are out looking at erosion and sediment control on a job site. Of that, and this is something I wanted to note, of that, we only had 56 NOVs that we issued last year. So I think that's a testament to the work that the contractors and developers are doing over time. A lot of those were December and the notice of violation. That's the 72-hour major deficiencies that we found. And I would venture to say, Ron, I don't know the percentage of those, but a lot of those were December of last year. We received that, just unusual amount of rain. So more times than not, contractors and developers are really diligent of trying to address these issues. And really, typically we don't have to get to that level. More times than not, they're out addressing their issues. But we did, like I said, issue 56 of those last year. And out of that 56, only 5 got to a point that we had to issue a stop work order. And so I think that's something to note as well, is that we actually have very few that get to a point where we've had to escalate it to the point that we're actually stopping work on a job site. And regarding John and his inspections, last year, John, the number I got from you, 1,093 lot level erosion sediment control inspections. All right, just a few slides of issues we see across, and these can basically be any development across town. The first, improper silt fence installation, that is a gap you see there. That's not the back side of the silt fence. That's about a 2-inch gap between the silt fence and the ground. So silt fence is not meant to be a wind barrier. It's meant to do sediment control. In that case, the requirement is the silt fence has to be trenched in. The minimum, I think, Ron's 6 inches. So, but it should be trenched in and adequately stabilized to prevent, for it to perform and function as it should. In that case, that was the crazy thing is that contractor had done all that work to install that silt fence and they're basically doing nothing. Not sure what was going on there. That one made it to our wall of shame. We have a folder of pictures that we keep of, kind of our wall of shame, if you will. Lack of stabilization. Most of the issues that we see on construction sites are lack of stabilization, basically seeding and mulching a job site. I always tell people the most effective erosion control job that you can do, you can have all the silt fence in place that you want, you can have the best sediment basins you can have in place, but the best, most cost-effective thing you can do is get grass growing on a job site. Most of your issues that you're going to have on development are stabilization related. Now, the city's requirement, and this is ADEM's requirement as well, is that if soil is disturbed and it's going to be unworked for more than 13 days, within 5 days of that disturbance, it has to be seeded and mulched. And that's a city requirement. That's also a state requirement. One of the issues we see is contractors get out and they pedal around a little bit on some dirt and they say, well, they're working it. So, technically it's not unworked anymore. Well, that's not always the case. So we try to work closely with our contractors and our developers to ensure they're properly stabilizing development. If they've got areas of their project that, they've cleared, they've graded, and they're not planning to do anything on that portion of the site for a period of time. Silt fence breach and failures. We see this a lot of times after we get these heavy rain events. This is a silt fence here that basically had done its job, but it just got inundated over time. And that silt fence that needs to be repaired. That silt fence that probably should have been cleaned out ahead of time, but it did result in a failure, and you can see sediment release there on the other side of the silt fence. This was interesting. That is a storm inlet on a job site. Should have had inlet protection, either a silt saver or a silt fence inlet protection around it. It did not. Not only is that an erosion control issue, but that's a safety issue as well, to have an open storm sewer manhole there with no protection around it. So that's an issue we see sometimes. Sediment basin maintenance. This is a photo here. You can see our sediment basins, we require baffles. Inside those basins, those are a kind of a jute mesh baffle. More times than not, those get impregnated with a polymer type material, PAM, polyacrylamide, that's basically a product that's used to try to enhance the settling capabilities of the sediment that's in the water. So those baffles, that basin has done its job, but it needs to be cleaned out. And a lot of times after these heavy rain events, we see that a lot. We see basins that are full. They need to be what we call demucked. They need to get an excavator, a piece of equipment in there, clean that sediment out, get it out of the basin, reestablish their basin, the volume in the basin. So when they get another rain event, it can function like it should.
Matt, how often do they have to clean that?
How often? It generally varies from job to job. A lot of times we'll go out and it just really depends on how much sediment they may have in their basin. That picture there is definitely indicative of one that needs cleaning out. It somewhat varies site to site, Ron, wouldn't you say? So
I think that the general rule is, anybody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's 1/3, if it's 1/3 of its capacity full, then it needs demucked.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think I had read halfway up definitely. It's supposed to
yeah,
be
that's right.
down.
That's right. And at that point, you're losing volume for it to perform and function
Down in the
Yeah,
head.
during the next rain event. And then one of the things we see, and I see this a lot right now, and you probably could go by a number of developments right now that you could tell me about that are tracking mud out on the road. And that's just, it's the nature right now. You'll see that they got these construction exit pads in place. One of the things that we've been looking at, some guys are doing it, some are doing a better job than others, are wash-off areas, where basically as their trucks are pulling out, they have a dedicated wash-off areas where they get out and wash the tires off their trucks. Some do a better job of that than others, so we've got some that we're on pretty hard about ensuring they keep the roads clean. So,
Can I ask a sediment? Okay, on the sediment basin, what if they cannot literally get a machine in there to clean it out? Like, is it just allowed to sit? That seems.
well, a lot of times, and that gets back into that where I was saying earlier, and I'm gonna hit on that a little bit in another slide, but
Okay.
if a lot of times when it's so wet that they just can't get a piece of equipment in there, that they may do more damage to it by trying to get in there and do something than they would if they just let it sit. A lot of times we're just using best judgment to say, okay, when it dries out enough that you can get a piece of equipment in there, we need you to get in and clean it out. From that rain event we had in December to really probably up until the last week or so, it's been so wet that you could not get a piece of equipment in to clean out.
But is that a design issue that like you should have located that in a place that you should be able to get equipment in and out of that?
It's not a design issue. It's more related to just constructability. It's honestly, they can't get an excavator, a big piece of equipment that weighs, thousands of pounds, down into some of these areas to clean out. And this isn't always the case.
But
I'm just giving you an
issue,
example.
right? Is that not a location issue on where it is on the
Well,
property?
generally, they're going to be sited
Low.
on the low side of a development because that's where a property is draining to, and that's where it makes the most. They're not going to site their basin at the top of the hill on the driest part of the property. They're going to site it down in general on the low area of a development, and then in those cases, a lot of times we have to use our best judgment to work with them to get in and clean it out. That's not always the case. I'm just giving you examples of things that we see at times. And that's just one of the examples of things we see at times. So, yes, ma'am.
But I don't understand why that's not done on the front end and it's not done with the engineer who's working with the developer for the property so you don't have this problem.
You don't have a way to access it.
Right.
Like,
Like, why is it,
even
okay, yes, it's in the low area, yes, we know this is an issue, but for them to be allowed to not have a way to access that makes no sense to me.
And I'm not saying this is every site every day. I'm saying this is an example of things we see at times.
Right.
And this is an example of things that we see at times here. This is not every case. We do have sites where it's just easier than it is, for other developments. I'm not really sure what kind of design standard. I mean, I'll note it, and there's some things we can look into. But a lot of times the nature of construction, I'm going to talk about this in a second with the rainfall we received. It gets very difficult for these contractors to work on some of these measures. Yes, ma'am.
I've seen contractors who think they can magically get all that mud and stuff and protect. There's no way that they can build a big subdivision in certain areas, and yet they are allowed to do that. Just because of the erosion, the water, it's always going to run downhill.
Stealing some of my thunder. You're going to get what we're talking about in a second. So.
Is there any minimum or maximum amount of acres that can be clear cut at once? Because that seems to be the main problem, that so much is cleared at once.
Man, y'all taking all my thunder for I've got some of that slides I will cover that in a second. Some of the challenges that we see, yes, you're exactly right. That's some of the things I'm going to talk about in just a second. The challenges. Hey, there we are. Last slide. All right, some of the challenges that we face with our program. Like I said, we feel like our program is really a poster child. And I think if you talk with most anybody in the state of Alabama, and really across the Southeast, they would tell you our erosion and sediment control program is as good or better than anywhere you would find across the state or across the Southeast. And I've been told that by numerous people at ADEM, by representatives with EPA, representatives from the Water Environment Federation and other groups. Our program and the way we're set up, not to say we're perfect by any means, we certainly have challenges, but we do feel like we're doing a good job with our program. So some of the challenges we face, and this sounds somewhat counterintuitive, but heavy rainfall really is an issue for us. BMPs, and like I said, I've been doing this about 15 years now. The very best erosion control plans are not perfect. There are going to be issues on every development after a rain event. There just are. It's the nature of construction. It's the nature of the erosion and sediment control best management practices that are available right now. When it rains, the way it's rained, 2017, we received 78 inches of rain. 2018, we were right at 77 inches of rain. Those are our two wettest years on record going back to 1973. Just to give you an idea that our normal rainfall is about 52 inches. So it's been a very, and rainfall in general is not the issue. If we get 2 or 3 inches of rain over 2 or 3 days, we generally don't have issues. Where we have the issues are the heavy, intense rainfall that seems to come more and more frequently now. When we get 5 inches of rain on December 28th that comes overnight, we're going to have issues. Those are the kind of issues that keep me up at night. So those are when we're going to have problems. That picture there is Saugahatchee Creek at Donahue. That's the Friday morning after we got that rain. And I like this picture for several reasons, but it shows everything from, I'm going to talk about this in a second, but turbidity, a turbidity plume coming off the job site. And it also just shows you the nature of and stormwater runoff in general and stormwater volume, those types of things. But rainfall can be a very significant problem for us as it relates to erosion control. The practices that are available, if you look at the ADEM requirements, if you look at a lot of the standards, they will say they're designed to perform to the maximum extent practical. It doesn't mean they're perfect. It doesn't mean that they're going to hold up in every rain event. It means that they're going to function, hopefully, in some of these lesser rain events that we have. And then these wet conditions, we're talking about this somewhat. You had some questions about that, but it makes it difficult for contractors to get in and do things. We work with the contractors to go in and get those items addressed, but at times it can be difficult. And there are times, I can tell you, numerous examples where if a contractor had got in and tried to do some work on a job site, they would have created a much more bigger mess than they had if they would have just waited, let it dry out, go in and correct those issues. So that is somewhat of a balance in that. Another issue, here in Auburn, we're fortunate or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to have a lot of clay soil. Those clay soils are great from a construction standpoint. They compact real nicely. They're good for building stuff, but they are a bear for us to deal with from an erosion and sediment control standpoint. I was talking with John earlier, and he said it would be nice to live down to the beach where they have all these sandy soils that just settle right out of the water, when they're having issues. But clay soil particles are extremely difficult to settle out of suspension. Once they get in the water, it is very difficult to settle that material out. No matter how good your silt fences are, your filters that you have in place, your sediment basin, those clay particles, which we typically see, most of our calls we get are related to this word here, what we call turbidity. Most of our calls are related to, hey, the stream is discolored in this area. The stream's muddy in this area. Turbidity is a measure of the discoloration of the water. It's not always indicative of how much sediment is in the water. It's basically just a measure of how cloudy the water is. Now it can give you an indication that there is sediment in the water, but it's not always indicative. Discolored water is not always indicative that there's been a sediment release from a job. It's not always indicative that there's a significant amount of sediment in the creek or the water body. It's simply a measure of the discoloration of the water. But most of the calls we get are related to turbidity from job site. This is what you were talking about, Ms. Newton, earlier. This is one of our biggest issues that we deal with now are these job sites that come in and the developers and contractors, they want to mass clear a job site. So they go in and they've got a 100-acre development and they want to bulldoze everything down and clear an entire site and then try to deal with erosion control on that. That's very difficult. If you've got a 100-acre job site that you've mass cleared and you're relying on silt fences and sediment basins to control erosion, you're going to have a lot of problems. The most effective jobs that we see on erosion control are these guys that come in, and I could name some examples of this. The guys that come in and try to do the phased development, where they clear a very small part of development, maybe they clear 10 acres of a site, they go in and work that, get their B&Ps established, build whatever they're going to build, move on to the next phase. That works, or some of this, what we call the fingerprint clearing, where they go in and they only clear what's necessary to build their roads, put in their homes, things like that. That's one of the things we see. And then lastly, just the nature of development right now. There's a lot of development going on. As I said, we're inspecting about 40 sites just on the development side. John's busy on the building side. We have as much or if not more development going on right now than we do on any job site. So that's obviously a challenge for us to be able to keep up with all of that. And I'm going to close it with that. That is my contact information. One of the things I tell people all the time is that, you know, there's only so many of us in our department. We can only be in so many places at one time. And so anytime you see an issue or something you don't think's right, please give me a call. I know I've dealt with Ms. Newton before, Ms. Hankus I've dealt with. Please call me if you see something that you're concerned about or you have an issue about. Please call us so we can get out and look at it. It very well could be something we're not aware of or hadn't had time to get out and check on. So please call us if you see any issues. And with that, I'm going to end the talk, and I'll be around till the end of the meeting if you got questions now or after the meeting. So yes, ma'am.
You mentioned that there's 3 employees. How long have there been 3 employees? How far back?
Since the beginning of the program.
That's
So-
what year?
Since 2005, when we developed the watershed division, there's been 3 employees. Now,
And
we're
how
hoping and we're trying
Yeah, I was gonna say how much
to
construction.
grow, but we're trying to cross that bridge, hopefully maybe be able to expand the staff here soon, in the next year or so.
The storm drains that are in neighborhoods, so like I have one between my house and my neighbor's, who's responsible when that's flooding my yard and there's like a ditch in between to go out to the creek in the back?
Now, it depends on if it's private infrastructure versus public.
It's running off the road.
If it's a drainage-related issue or flooding, generally our public works department is going to be charged with that. So Scott Cummings and his staff
So that's
charged
something
with
to
dealing
call,
with.
come look and see if they need to.
Yes,
come
ma'am.
dredge
If
it
there's
out.
some kind of issue, if there's a blocked storm sewer pipe or, some type of flooding issue, I would just call Scott Cummings in the Public Works Department.
Going back to the, like, you go in to clear 100 acres versus you go in, that's not currently regulated?
It's not,
Who would
The-
if you wanted that to be regulated, who would that fall to be regulated?
it would, ultimately, it would be something that would have to go back to city council. There would have to be some planning changes.
Right, through the planning
I'll be honest, looking at that from the contractor and the developers, the biggest issue with that is when they're trying to phase in work and they have a contractor plan that's gonna come in and do their roads or do their utilities, at times that can get it can get difficult for them to schedule out, okay, I want you to come in, but you can only put in this 100 feet of storm pipe or sewer pipe or whatever it is. And then I'm gonna call you back in 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, and then I'm gonna let you put in another 100 feet. That's the balancing act we have to deal with. There's some communities, not any in Alabama that I'm aware of, but there's some in the United States. We've actually talked about looking at some of that, see if there's something that maybe we could look at in regards to that, but there's some hoops we'd have to jump through.
I know several years ago when I was on the tree commission, we took a different approach where we gave awards to contract developers who saved trees. I don't know if they're still doing that or not.
I don't know.
So then it would help reduce the runoff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I certainly don't, the intent of that is not to pay, we have a lot of the guys that do a great job, but we really do, and they understand. Now, I'll tell you, when we first developed this program back in 2003, we had numerous issues because it was something brand new to developers and contractors. This was all something they hadn't dealt with before, they hadn't planned to deal with it. And now all of a sudden we have these new requirements. We were having, I've stood in city court several times back around that time with developers that were having issues that we've taken to court for fines. But over time, as our program's in place, we find that more times than not, developers and contractors understand that erosion sediment control is part of the price of development, and they include it in their construction costs. There are a lot of firms around that that's all they do is erosion sediment control work. There's 2 or 3 here in Auburn that make a living just doing erosion sediment control on construction sites.
So the county islands that are within the city limits, who's doing those developments, or like ones out Donahue and stuff? I mean, who are y'all?
If they're in city limits of Auburn, then we're charged. I know. I know where you're talking about. I live out in North Donahue in Ward 2 as well. But if it is in the county, then ultimately it's outside of our Phase 2 jurisdiction. At that point, it falls under the county. The county has a stormwater program. They have an erosion sediment control program. The problem for the county, and it's not a problem they've brought on themselves, it's just the way county government is set up. They don't have the enforcement capabilities that a city has. So if they find issues, typically they're going to have to call in ADEM and notify ADEM that there's been an issue if they see an issue on the county development.
So is it true that a developer can come in and in the county put in the road and then ask to be
annexed.
annexed? I mean, they can do all that without anything, and then
They're gonna have to bring their roads and their infrastructure up to city standards. It'll be in the development agreement or the agreement of the annexation. There'll be requirements levied on them. Now, specifically what those are, I don't know offhand, but yes, there are requirements that they have to do some improvements in order to come up to city standards. I'm gonna have to cut man off here. He's gonna stick around, so if you have specific questions, but if not, we'll never get to anything else this evening. I do want to thank the opportunity tonight. The last board meeting, I had the assistant city manager come and talk to us about capital improvement programs. And this time, based on the input I've gotten from y'all, this is the subjects that I picked for this evening. If you have specific topics or presentations you'd like to hear, whether it be the Park and Recreation Master Plan or the library board or whatever, if you let me know, we'll get them scheduled to come talk to y'all on a given night. Just the things that I've been getting calls about or emails or whatever, of course traffic. So I'm trying to update you just a little bit on what's happening on some of these things. I got some comments about the entrance from Willow Creek onto Highway 14 and how it backs up in the morning, and school buses sometimes having to wait quite a while as well. So I've asked the city to look into that, and Chief Register is going to evaluate that and determine if we can put some police officers out there at specific times. Don't know if it's going to happen yet, but at least that's what we're trying to do now. Again, that is Highway 14 is not a city road, so there's some limitation on what we can do and can't do. There's a hill on Donahue near the new construction site where that development is going in on the right as you're headed out. They evaluated that again, and when they designed that, they had design criteria that takes into account speed limits and sight lines. And it apparently meets the design criteria as required. But because, again, that's not a city road, I've asked that they consider putting in some solar-powered caution flashing lights or something just to kind of warn people that that hill is coming up. Again, that's something that they are reviewing right now, and hopefully they'll follow through on. Had a lot of comments when the Richland and Shug intersection was being finalized. Had some comments about why did they do a certain lane a certain way? Why did they have turn lane one way or this and that? And I can't answer why it was designed the way it was. But what's good is that it is finally there. The construction portion is either completed or about to be completed. And the majority of the comments I got as far as what we can do in the future is is better markings, make sure that the curbs are visible, reflectors, those kind of things. And that will it's all part of the process. So I asked them to put some temporary things out there for the time being, and I think you've seen some cones or whatever, just kind of to help us become aware and used to that intersection. Runoff obviously has been an issue. We had two specific areas. The arbors near Cary Woods has been highly discussed. And then the other one is any kind of construction runoff coming off of Richland Road that feeds into the Willow Creek Pond. So those two areas are the areas of emphasis. And we've relayed that over to Matt, and we've had some individual meetings on some things. But again, I please encourage you to contact me, contact Matt or something if we have specific issues that we need to address.
Where's the arbors, the one that's?
The arbors is to the east, to the west of Cary Woods. A large area has been cleared. It's had repeated comments. On White Street, yes.
Which is off the street?
Yes, White Street off the drain.
Northern end of White Street.
But they've been responsive from time to time, and it's, like I said, if we had some different design requirements that didn't allow us clearing quite as much as a single issue or a single time, it might help. But what's done is done, and they are working to respond to some things. They've been called. Okay, future developments. The city council considered what's been known as the Corradino development, and that was over where if you're coming on Richland Road, crossing Shug, and how it used to kind of go straight and then dogleg again to the right, back onto Richland again. Okay, it'd be back to the left of all that. Okay, so their initial offering included a bunch of things that could be considered to be student housing type projects. So that was finally discussed, and they finally realized that there was enough opposition that they withdrew that plan altogether. So because they were asking for conditional use, or something that's not normally allowed, it would have come to the city council. So they recognized it wasn't going to pass. So they've gone back now and redesigned that into single family homes, and that will go before the planning commission at the next planning commission meetings. Because it's allowed by right, they're asking to put in something that is already approved and allowed. That will not come to the city council. So if you have interest in that, you need to attend the planning commission meetings. Okay. Let's see, Wire Road, the area right before you get to the soccer complex on the right, the whole bunch of green space, that's owned by a family that has previously been granted permission to build a senior living facility back through there. Well, that plan fell through. So they asked for it to be annexed and zoned for them to allow that. But now that the project has fallen through, they wanted to get the same zoning and whatnot for the rest of their property between, I guess that's the volunteer fire station and the soccer complex. Okay, they asked for some zoning and changes on that. Again, that was realized it wasn't going to happen. So for the time being, they are going to develop single family homes in that portion of that big green field that's closest to the fire station, back there where there's a lake back in there. So I anticipate at some point that the family will come in and ask for changes there. So there may be single family homes developed in that piece of land. That's not in our ward, it's in Ward 8, but obviously that's one of the bigger projects that's kind of come before the council lately. Let's see, what else? Recycling bins. Okay, it was supposed to be completed by the end of January. The weather is blamed for the delays, and so now it's going to be at the end of February before everything is completely delivered on the recycling bins. Now, if you live on a street or an area and we're not in the initial zone or initial target area for all that, and somebody on your street, if there's already a route going near you, you can call and request to have a bin put in, even though they haven't done your area yet. It may not apply to most of you, I understand, but there's a outside chance you could get one before that. Let's see. Other council items that you may have read about in the paper a lot is the Ward 1 area and what's been called gentrification, where families who have been there for a long, long time, some of which have reached the point where they want to sell their property. They sell the property to a developer, and the next thing you know, we've got student housing in there. That has happened a lot, particularly in the area of Fraser, back in White, between Fraser, White, all back in that block. What's already underway is already underway. It's permitted, allowed, it's moving out. The homes that were built in there met the criteria of a single-family home when they applied for their permits and their permission to proceed. You know, what actually went in there are the 5-bedroom, 5-bath type homes. So it's obviously for students, not necessarily single families. But it was categorized as single family, and they were allowed to proceed. There's the task force is addressing student housing, and I urge any and all of you to attend some of those meetings. But as part of that is something they call the detached academic dwelling unit. So they're going to create a new category of homes, a new category of structures called that, and those will be restricted to certain areas of town. So it's too late to help the folks that are right there along Fraser, but hopefully in the future.
But what was that zoning? That zoning then must not have been for single families.
It was zoned for single families, and these buildings are
Technically.
Yeah, right, but
technically single
but you got
family.
5 unrelated people living there.
If you
It's
look at the
because-
5 unrelated map, and I encourage everyone to do it, it's all over the town,
Yeah.
all over. I live above 280 on Plainsman Hills. I'm in a rural area, zone rural, but I can have 5 unrelated in my neighborhood.
Yes, there are different. There are maps available that show you where 5 related or 2 related or whatever
5 unrelated.
unrelated are allowable. And there's a number of maps, zoning maps. I encourage you to look online for the GIS site, Geospatial Information System site, the map sites, and see where some of those things are. So that's something that's being worked on right now. One of the task force is considering those things. The roundabout that most of y'all have heard a lot about. Some of you went to the public information meeting held by the Department of Transportation. It really came down to a roundabout or no improvement. A lot of folks thought it was going to be a choice between a roundabout and a light. The state and the federal criteria for giving us the money to do something was not satisfied. The traffic count did not warrant their cutoff limit, their criteria. So they weren't going to put in a stoplight, and it's not our road. In fact, three of the 4 corners of that intersection are in the county. They're on little pieces of county land.
Where are you talking about?
Farmville and North College. So the city thought it was best, and in fact I encouraged the council and others to, let's go ahead and generate a letter of endorsement for that, because if we didn't use it, we didn't spend the money, there are a lot of communities around the state that are going to get that money. So it really came down to, do we want a safety enhancement, whether it's a roundabout, or do we want nothing? So if you have issues with why we're having a roundabout, please see me, because it wasn't my first choice either, but rather than have nothing, I wanted a safety enhancement. So, let's see, board vacancies, again, I've got a list up here for y'all to take a look at on board and commission vacancies. That task force, I was on that task force is concluded, and so we have new procedures in place to select, screen, interview, whatever our applicants for boards and commissions. And we are going to do interviews for Board of Education and the Planning Commission. Those are the 2 that we're going to actually have public interviews. And the announcement for the Board of Education vacancy has already been posted. So if you're interested in that, please take a look. There's some cutoff dates and whatnot we need to be aware of. But the interview process is not intended to dissuade people from applying. It's just intended for us to make sure that we get people that represent what we want to do on the various those 2 key positions. That will be, they'll receive the questions ahead of time. They'll all receive the same questions. They'll have an opportunity to present their answers at a open to the public interview board consisting of members of the city council. And so they will all have the exact same opportunity to make their case. All right, the other task forces that are in work right now, one is the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force. The other is the Student Housing Task Force and the Short-Term Rentals Task Force. And And the short-term rentals, basically Airbnb, vacation rentals by owner, those kind of things. And that's probably the one that's the most contentious right now, yes.
I have a question about that, but as I was reading all the stuff on there, if I live in Cary Woods where you aren't allowed to have more than 2 unrelated, they weren't even considering letting them go in there, is that correct? Or do I need to go and make sure they're not?
You probably should go and make sure they're not.
Because it was saying that you can't do it in
Right.
whatever my zoning is.
Well, they started out
Oh,
with
sure they
a
are.
draft ordinance that the planning commission worked on, I'm sorry, not the planning commission, the planning department worked on months and months ago before we established the task force, before this really became an issue. They were trying to head it off. I would have preferred that they started with a blank sheet of paper, but they didn't. But what you've seen circulated for comment, that is simply a start point where they had to have some kind of kickoff level to actually get their discussion started. If there's anything in that draft that you don't like, be sure to bring it up. You can send me your comments, and I forward them on to the task force members, or you're welcome to send them to them directly. But if you have comments or questions like that, I don't know what the end result's going to be. That's why I can't really answer your question.
I'm on that task force, and as Kelly says, we needed something to begin a conversation, so we took that document from the planning department, and I imagine that the end result will look nothing like what that is, but we just needed a basis to start a conversation. We felt at that point, Brett Smith and I, and we are receiving a lot of input from the community within neighbourhood conservation zones that feel that it's reasonable to allow a resident who lives in that home to supplement their income by renting out their home periodically throughout the year. That has been a pretty consistent response that we've received so far. And we're still very much in an infancy stage with this. We're adding members to the task force because as it stands now, there are 2 elected officials and 2 appointed officials on the task force, which doesn't really reflect our community. Just having officials such as us there, we need much more input from the neighbourhood. And so I ask for your patience as we kind of plug away at this methodically and with a lot of serious deliberation. Yes?
All right, you said you need more members on that task force?
Yes, ma'am.
How do you go about selecting those?
Well, we would invite you to make contact with us through email. What we've done, we've held 2 public meetings so far, and we've obviously met with a lot of interested people through those public meetings. We anticipate having at least 1 more public meeting. And so I have got a bunch of people in mind that I've met just through my experience with this, and I'm sure Brett Smith has the same, but we are yet to sit down together and really begin that side of forming a more comprehensive representative body.
Are you asking for folks who are interested?
I'm happy if you'd want to email me. My email is bparson@auburnalabama.org. You can find it on the Auburn website.
So Bob Parsons and Brett Smith are the 2 council members that are working on that task.
Be happy to have any of y'all's input.
Is there a place to find out when any of those task force meetings?
Yes. The city website has a calendar of events. It lists all the meetings, had this one and others on there. So, and if you have questions on any of them, let me know and I'll find it for you.
If you're looking for the next task force meeting, it hasn't been scheduled yet, but as soon as it is scheduled, it'll go out on the Auburn website.
Yeah, Bob is our #1 advocate for public engagement and transparency. He's the guy that led the charge on all the streaming. You can see he videoed all the council meetings up until the point where the city took over, doing it on his own, put it out on his own webpage, and he's volunteered.
And I will continue to do that with every meeting that I attend, like work session, council work sessions, anything where it's in the public domain. I take my tripod and my city issued phone with me everywhere I go. And
I wanted to tell you, because you were interested in this, that the first short-term rental task force met on January 17th, and Bob did video it, and it is available on his Facebook page.
yeah, you can go and see all my videos. They're archived on, if you search on YouTube, Bob Parsons, Ward 6, something like that, you can see both the public meetings on short-term rentals and a couple of other interesting meetings, work session meetings that where we deliberated on the appointments procedures. It's a good one to watch. Interesting if you're into that kind of thing.
And also, I'd like to interject that someone stood up at City Council Tuesday night and stated that he did not believe short-term rentals were even an issue. He did not understand why a short-term rental task force had even been set up. And so he publicly made that statement. And you know, if you have a position on this, it is very important that you communicate your position to Mr. Parsons and Mr. Smith, and attend meetings if you can.
But it has to go, once they have their final recommendation, then it has to be approved by the council.
Once they have their final recommendations, the city staff will put together a properly worded ordinance, make it legal and whatnot, and then it will go, Bob, does it go to the planning commission first?
I believe so.
Then there's public.
There's public interface with
Yes.
the planning commission, and then it will come to the city council and. I don't know how many of y'all have taken advantage of that. It'll still be up and running till February 18th. And there's been an awful lot of interest in that. It brings a lot of people to the mall, which is good for all of us because it generates tax money. So that's a good thing. I've had invitations to attend some homeowner association meetings. If y'all are a member of a homeowner association and would like me to come to your meeting, I'd be more than happy to do that. I've met with the Cotswolds and Solomere so far. And then a neighborhood that doesn't have a homeowner association, the Fraser, everything behind Fraser and Ross in that vicinity had a neighborhood meeting the other day, so I have to look at that as well. But please feel free to ask me to come to whatever, and I'll be happy to do that. And finally, the Citizens Public Safety Academy, I sent that out on Facebook and on Nextdoor. That was one of the first things I did when I came to Auburn several years ago, and it was tremendously informative. Helped me figure out all the road networks and whatnot. But it was a good orientation to the city and those that serve the city and serve us as the public, the firefighters and the policemen, the codes folks, communications, 911 people, all that kind of stuff. It had a really fun day. You got the range and shoot everything, so that's fun too. But that's something that I would highly recommend if you have an interest in learning a little bit more about those that serve us. So, yes, ma'am.
Can you put an announcement about these ward meetings on Nextdoor?
I did, yes. It's on Nextdoor, it's on my Facebook page, it's on the announcement that comes out with your water bill, it's on the website.
Nextdoor Cotswold didn't get it. I did.
Okay, again, if there's some other way you want me to communicate with you, please let me know. Those are my main needs right now, and I wish we had, just an overall everything website of some sort, but we don't. So, again, Facebook and Nextdoor, and you have you can pick up one of these, get my contact info, please let me know. If you have a specific subject you want us to address, again, please let me know so we can plan it for next month. So, with that, I'll open it up to y'all. What do you have that you want me to look into, or whatever? Yes, ma'am.
At Farmville, where Auburn Lakes Road starts, there's a lot of clearing going on. Is that county, or how far does the city go? Do you know what's going in there? What's
No,
being
I
cleared
don't know.
for?
Auburn Lakes Road. That property that just got swamped, that is.
Yeah, there was a section, good night, y'all, thank you. Dana's telling me that was some property that was, we de-annexed 1.6 acres and re-annexed 1.6 acres the other day for a land swap based on the two owners that wanted some help on visibility of the road and that kind of thing, so. I don't know if that's what you're talking about or
Well,
not.
I know they're clearing out trees and whatnot on Auburn Lakes Road, and I just was curious.
Right there at Farmville and Auburn Lakes,
Uh-huh.
that is in the county.
Okay.
And there's another, map that you can look at that shows all the permits. So if you see some ground being broken somewhere and you're wondering what's going on with it, you can go to the map, you can click on it, and it'll tell you what's going on there. And, I have to use that a lot, because there's an awful lot of
Can
it.
you put that link out, or put it on your Facebook page?
Sure, I can do that, yeah.
Next door, just.
Put that on the Facebook, okay? What else? Yes,
On Donahue, where the new Woodward, I can't remember what it's called, that subdivision going in. So if you're heading south on Donahue, is there going to be a designated left-hand turn lane into that subdivision, or?
I'd have to look into that one.
Okay.
Bad to be on that.
It's on the side of, with elementary school? Or the,
Across the street from food, you know.
Well, it is on the same, it's.
oh, you're saying going south, so coming towards town?
Yes, coming towards the school, and that's where that rise happens.
Oh, that one.
And,
Yeah, rise.
and,
So
having
turn.
living on 14 and knowing how it gets all backed up, especially in the mornings.
Okay, I'll find out.
Thank you, Kelly.
Yes.
Is there a place where we can see the plans for the Sagahatchee River,
The Greenway?
the Greenway?
I think is that on the website? Y'all
I'm
know.
not sure if it's on the website or
It
not.
may be in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And I'll post a link to
Okay.
what that's gonna look like.
We can help facilitate getting that to you, Kelly.
Okay,
Somebody in our department or Dan Ballard
Yeah,
with
Dan
Public
Ballard.
Works, we'll get it to you.
that picture that Matt showed at the end was city employees going down Sagahatchee Creek, trying to figure out, which parts are navigable, which ones are not navigable, whatever, and just kind of see what's feasible back in there.
Can you speak to the, and I don't know which complex is, the very big student one that went bankrupt and somebody else bought it, and one where it has the bricks falling out?
Okay, the Evolve,
Okay, and I've been told that like it's caving in, and in 2 years, all things gonna be torn down, and I'm just,
you have our inspector back here, maybe.
Speak on that one. The building is not going to be torn down. It has actually been evaluated by 5 independent engineering firms. Originally, engineering is a firm that designed the building. Issues were there. The design didn't work as where they wanted to. When the issues were discovered by the contractor, everybody, more engineering firms would come in and check the map and everything, and fixes were done. They even had engineers on site for 4 months, every day, for 10 hours, recheck every nail, every bolt. So the building got built. It has some issues, but it is locked in. 5 engineering firms have all signed off on it independently that it's not going anywhere.
it's not clicking.
It's not sinking. Unfortunately, it is a snake bait. A guy in the Jeep went flying to the parking deck, he bounced, he hit a sprinkler head. Well, on social media, it goes out, the building is, the plumbing is exploding. The issue with the brick, again, it goes back to our original engineer, there's gaps they put every so often for settling, actual settling goes away to the building. They designed a 5/8 inch gap. The building owner decided to have 1.5 inch gaps designed. Well, the 2 bricks ran into each other during natural settling, so that pressure built up on them and it caused the bricks to crack. The new owners of the property have hired their own engineers, and they have been doing destructive and non-destructive testing for the last month to determine how to fix it. And that's why we also had them put in the pedestrian protection. We haven't really had more than a piece of brick this big fall off, but as a city, we didn't want any citizens walking by. That's why you see the walkway. It's not like they're start popping off the building right now, but we didn't anybody hurt. And so we requested the building owners put it up, and they did. So the building's not sinking. They're not tearing it down, and the students moving across the street or anything like that.
And I don't think it was bankrupt, I think it was
They
simply
sold
sold.
it. Yeah, it's sold.
It was sold to a new owner.
A lot of these are built, they own it for 1 year, they show they have 100% occupancy, so it's like a great investment, another bank comes in, another apartment comes in and buys it.
Other questions, comments, requests? Yes, sir.
One of the things that upset a lot of people last year with the former city council was the building height
Yes, sir.
on college. Is there any chance that that's revisited?
I don't think so. I was one of the main proponents, or what do you call it? Not opponents. I was the one against it. Opposition. And I was unsuccessful in arguing that it was inappropriate. And basically, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. What's approved is approved. We're going to see more high rises, I believe, in the direction of down Dean toward Donahue, down that direction. We have the proposed hotel project downtown, which is supposed to be 75 feet as well. So I really don't see an opportunity for us to change things. And if we did, it would definitely result in lawsuits, because people have purchased property with the expectation that the current zoning is in place. If you go back and downgrade the zoning, then you basically degraded the return on investment. And so I believe that we would face lawsuits and probably lose those. I wish we could back up several years, but I don't see that happening. Sorry. Yes, sir.
What about the connector road from Richmond to Highway 14?
Okay, that connector road, the city has contracted for I guess you could just call it a study. The developers are going in there and doing route feasibility studies, that kind of thing. It would go near the tennis complex on Richland as a proposed start point. There are some parcels of land in there that the city owns or that the school district owns. The other end of it would come out over at where you cross the railroad tracks, that Chinese restaurant on 14, somewhere along in there. But the property on that end of that road is privately owned, and there'll be an awful lot of negotiations that have to go on with the landowner. So no route has been locked in stone by any means, but the feasibility design work is continuing now. So that really, it's on that far right-hand line portion of Richland as you're looking at it on the map, so the far east end of Richland. And that would help some, but you're still got the two schools on Richland, so you're gonna have traffic problems on Richland.
Right out there by the schools, I don't see what's.
Yeah, you're gonna have traffic problems on Richland for the foreseeable future. If you're in these various homeowner associations, you may get visited by a group that is planning a new development out on Mrs. James Road. So if you go out Donahue all the way to Farmville, turn left, then you have the left fork, which is Mrs. James. There's a single property owner that has 1,600 acres in there. One person owns it.
All the way down to the Sagahatchee Creek, all along there.
Yep, has down to the creek. And he is putting together a planned community because it's a unique opportunity that they have a large parcel of land. Right now in Auburn, you'll have a couple acres here, 10 acres here, and you've got developers will come in and try to cram as much as they can into it. Well, this gentleman wants to have a development that is widespread, pre-planned, true planned community with school sites which he's willing to donate, greenway land he's willing to donate, or blueway rather. Gonna have like 40-acre park in the middle of it. It'll have access, to the public. And he's gonna do these are things that he is considering, talking about, and his crew is kind of making the rounds to the various homeowner associations now. The reason I talk about that now is because one of the things he proposes as part of that is the beginning of the outer loop. He's willing to develop that portion that goes off of Farmville, cuts through and connects over at the far end of Richland, up by the defunct water treatment plant. That is defunct, right? That water treatment plant, or
It's mothballed.
mothballed, okay.
It's not going away. It'll be
Not going
rebuilt
away,
one
but
day.
anyway, it connects somewhere on the far end of Richland. So that's something that you'll hear more about. And the reason I asked him to go talk to the homeowner associations, I didn't want anybody to be surprised by it when they start reading about it in the paper, or hear it coming before a planning commission or something like that, so.
Does the school already have property for the next high school somewhere out there?
The next high school, not that I know of.
Yes.
Oh, it does?
Yes.
That's over in that path. Okay.
That is the problem.
They have property there for
Is
it.
it somewhere off
Richmond.
Miss James's, or?
No.
No, I heard they weren't gonna put it on Richland.
The school
They
district,
purchased it for that though.
yeah, the school district owns land, that's what I was talking about. They have a couple of parcels in there that either the city owns or the, school board owns. The latest I heard is they own it, but they don't tend to put a high school in there because they've seen the problems it created with Richland already. So they're either going to dispose of it, change it, or put a lesser school in there of some sort, but there's nothing definitive as to what they're gonna do with that property yet. Is that accurate from the
So
city?
there's not property out St. Miss James or somewhere out there where they were planning on the second high school?
No. No. That's best.
Two schools that are, I'm sorry.
I'm changing the subject, if you wanna go ahead.
I was gonna say, the two schools that this developer was talking, what do they call them? Interest people who are doing this conceived community, planned community north of Sagashi, and off of St. Miss James.
Right.
When it curves around, there's actually gonna be two schools there eventually on that road.
The master plan looks like there's property set aside for two schools, one of which he's willing to donate. The other one we'd have to purchase at some point. So, yeah, there's room out there for schools, and also he's gonna donate a site for a new fire station, which we need in that part of town. So,
And one was elementary and then the other one was supposed to be,
it's a satellite school to one of the others.
satellite.
But now, that's a 2-year project, okay? So it's not like we're gonna have several thousand new homes pop up tomorrow.
Good to be aware of them.
But he's gonna try to submit it all as a single action at some point here, probably within the next year, so.
Okay, so maybe it's not a change of subject, this landowner, you said that he'll have a greenway, then you said, no, I mean a blue way. You don't mean that he's against a greenway, I mean, it might still happen. Because I know the,
If he's what, now, against it? No.
yeah.
No, it's not against
Okay,
it at all.
good, because I know the Green Ridge Advisory Board is putting that greenway along the Sagahatchee,
That's,
and
yeah.
it'll probably continue through there.
Yes, it goes down, past Donahue and continues
Yeah.
on, out of the city limits, so.
The greenway and blueway are being talked about. They're, basically the greenway is the land portion, the blueway is actually the creek itself, floatability of the creek, so.
Yeah.
The bottom of that property is a large floodplain, so it's not buildable. He's gonna donate it to the city, so that the facilities, the restrooms, the ramps, and those kinds of things, put in, take out ramps, they're all have a place to go.
Yeah, I just wanted to be sure I understood you right.
No, that's
Community,
it.
planned community.
Okay.
not-
We've kept y'all a lot longer than I'm sorry if we overran. I'll try to limit these in the future to an hour. I'll stick around a while if you have other questions. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Kelly.
Just thank you to Kelly and Matt and Bob for all you're doing.
Please get these handouts.